Well, he stared at me. It felt like somebody had come up behind me with a hypodermic needle filled with ice water, shoved it into my spine, and I just felt myself going cold from head to toe.
Welcome back to Beat Everyone, brought to you by Broadway Joe's, the newest sports betting app coming to you this fall. I'm Ben Flanagan. Today we're going to be back with Eli Gold, and we talk about all things Nick Saban, what he remembers about the iconic coach while calling his entire career at Alabama. Let's go to that conversation right now. Hey, welcome back to Beat Everyone. I'm Ben Flanagan. I'm with AL.com's Michael Casagrande, and we're back with another edition of our miniseries, The Golden Age, and we are once again talking to the one and only Eli Gold. Eli, welcome.
Thank you, guys. Good to be with you again.
So, Eli, today we're talking about Nick Saban.
I remember him.
Yep. Great football coach.
Yeah.
A guy you worked with, a guy who yelled at me quite a bit. We're going to start at the beginning. So what would you say, what was the first meeting like? What was the first time you met Nick Saban?
It probably was either in the hallway of the football building or on the football practice field in spring workouts. But, we met early. As a matter of fact, one of the things I do remember, and I was glad I did a lot of speeches. I went to all these alumni chapters all across the country and, grabbed dinner, talked with the alums, had a great time. And, people would always ask me, well, what do you know about Nick Saban? And, I met him when he was, at LSU and yada, yada, just the normal answers. And I said, but he's good. I said, I do know that. I know he's good. And that was always the prevailing theme. Now, the guy's good. How's he going to get involved here? Let's wait and see. But clearly the guy is good. And the first time I ever met him, he thanked me for saying that. He said, I understand you spoke at whatever it was, and you were very complimentary of me. And I said, well, it's my pleasure. I said, you know what? I said, Coach, we're all in this together, is what I had said. But again, you got to understand, I'm not a mainline journalist. I was, the university's voice. I said, so we're all in this together. And that was the right thing to say. He values the team aspect of life. Obviously, our relationship grew over the years, but it was a number of years. And to say that I know if it was 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, I don't know. But it was a number of years before we really loosened up a good bit. And that was probably as much me as anything else. I just didn't want to get into a bad spot with him. But, it took a number of years before we were, able to loosen up. Maybe he was traveling during the Crimson Caravan thing that we did all over the country, 2 shows a week for 6 or 7 weeks all across the nation. Whatever it was, we always got along very, very well.
Eli, does the hiring of somebody like Nick Saban change your mindset as a broadcaster at all? Because obviously we know what happened in the Shula era. It was in transition, and when they hire a guy like Nick Saban, who obviously has had a lot of success, you start to think, okay, things are going to change in terms of the way I call the games, the way I set the scene. How did you feel when they hired him?
I was happy for the university and for Mal Moore. I thought he made a great selection. We all knew his background. But did it affect me? No. I call, if the quarterback hands it off to the tailback, it doesn't matter if Mike Shula called the play or if Nick Saban called the play. I describe it the same way. So the only thing that we had to adjust to was his likes and dislikes. For instance, Coach Shula, we would do our pregame show sometimes on Thursday. He would like to get it out of the way. Occasionally, we would do it on Friday at the hotel or in his office or what have you, whatever it might be. Nick Saban came in. We said, Coach, what are your desires? He said, we're going to do that show 2 hours before kickoff. 2 hours before kickoff. And, of course, as a result, we had to alter our pregame show because I was going to be gone from the booth to go down to the locker room, whatever city we were in, to catch up with the coach, sit down, and do the pregame show. His thinking, and it made sense, his thinking was that interview was one of the most important of the week. With no disrespect to any other interview, any other questions, my questions weren't, revolutionary by any stretch, but they were current to 2 hours before kickoff. If player X woke up with the flu and can't play today, if this happened, if that happened, if somebody tripped getting off the bus and they turned their ankle, whatever it might be, he wanted that pregame interview to be the latest, most current news for the listener. So we did it 2 hours before kickoff, and I'd come downstairs after doing the first half hour, 45 minutes on the air, and I'd go downstairs and, in his office, in the locker room when we were doing it at home games, he has, for those of you who don't know, there's the big team room, then there's a coach's locker room, and then there's the Nick Saban locker room. And we would go in and do it in his private locker room. In some cities, there were no locker rooms like that. And I remember in Starkville one day, we did it sitting on a John Deere tractor. There was an area under the grandstands, not far from the Alabama locker room, and there was a John Deere sitting there with 2 seats, some kind of a machine. I don't know what it was. I'm from Brooklyn. We didn't have John Deeres in Brooklyn. And we sat down side by side on this John Deere and knocked out the pregame show. We've done it from everywhere, in the bowels of stadiums. We've done it from wherever. You name it, we've done it. So we had to adjust things to accommodate his wants in that regard. But, he said we're going to do our coach's show on Thursday night. Not Monday, not Tuesday. It's going to be, hey, Coach, and the Nick Saban show will be Thursday night. That's when I need to get out. That's when I've got some free time, and so on. So we obviously have to adjust to his wants, his likes and dislikes. But exclusive of that, nothing really.
And I'd always see you. I feel like every time I get to the press box, I'd see you getting on the elevator, going down to do your Nick Saban interview. And it was always newsworthy, and we would always listen to it from the press box because it was always, like you said, the most up-to-date news, and it was relevant.
Yeah.
There was a lot of news that would come out of it when he would talk about
I
personnel.
remember when we had all that deal with the textbooks and so on years ago, he told me about that on the pregame show. And it hadn't been news on Friday. It became news overnight that day. So there were reasons to do that. But then again, certain coaches like to do it as early in the week as they could, get away with it. It's just, and some coaches, you're free to talk about whatever. Others didn't want you talking about whatever. I remember doing a show with Gene Stallings one year, and I've forgotten all the details, but both centers were hurt. Both centers were banged up. So at practice this one day, and I don't always go to practice, but I'm there a decent amount. And this one day, Patrick Hape, who was a tight end for Alabama, who had high school center experience, he snapped the ball in high school on occasion. He came in, and became the center during practice that day. He took every snap, or he did every snap with the quarterback. And I made note of that, obviously. but I didn't tell anybody. I don't have a daily column. I didn't have a daily show. I've got nowhere to tell people. I'm not going to, and if I rolled over and told my wife, well, she'd say, oh, okay, good, whatever. So I just sat on it. Well, then we go to record the pregame show on Saturday, or on Friday, rather. Coach did it on Friday in his hotel room. And we would always talk, for an hour about everything in life. The families would be there, his family, Ruth Ann, the girls, my family, our daughter. She'd be playing. It was just, we'd sit around, and I'd say, all right, Coach, if you're all right, let's turn the machine on, the tape recorder, and tape the show. He said, sure. So we taped the show, and I, in the middle of the show, said, we're visiting with Coach Gene Stallings. I paraphrase, but the intent is, I said, Coach, tell me about the experiment with Patrick Hape at center this week because of the injuries to Joe Blow and Joe Blow. And he looked at me, and he said, turn off that damn machine. I said, what? Turn off that damn machine. I said, okay, what's the matter? Did you ever hear me say that we were using Patrick Hape at center? I said, well, I was there, on Tuesday and Thursday, and I saw him snapping the ball. But did you ever hear me say that he was snapping it on game day? I said, well, no, sir. He said, then we aren't going to talk about that. Now turn the machine back on. And I went back and I rephrased the question. I said, Coach, last week Joe Blow and Andy Amos got hurt. What are the plans at center this weekend? And he gave me a good answer, and so on and so forth. So you've got to be careful sometimes. Nick Saban, first year, I just didn't know that he hated to compare. The C word. Indeed. The C word for a lot of people is cancer. For Nick Saban, the C word is compare. He hates to compare anything.
Testified.
Yeah. Well, I asked him, and I forget exactly, but I said, Coach, we're taping this in his office, and I said, Alabama's had some great running backs. You got this one, you got that one, you got this style, that style, hard runners, finesse guys, da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Tell me about Eddie Lacy. How would you compare him with others? Well, he stared at me, and I didn't know what I had done because he had never made it clear that he didn't want to compare. He stared at me. He stared at me, and he gave me a very awful answer. He just didn't want to talk about it. He stared at me. And folks, when I mean he stared at me, it felt like somebody had come up behind me with a hypodermic needle filled with ice water, shoved it into my spine, and then hit the plunger on the syringe. I mean, I just felt myself going cold from head to toe. And we finished the show. Now, normally when the show is over, he is up and gone. I would be saying, that's Coach Nick Saban. Coach, thanks so much for your time. And he would normally get up and walk out to his next appointment because his day was always so regimented. Well, this time I said, Coach Nick Saban with us. That's it. Coming up, we've got this and this and this. And, of course, more from Bryant-Denny Stadium. It's Alabama and whatever I said. And he never got up to leave. And I said to myself, uh-oh. I thought maybe I can start reading War and Peace here or something. And we finally finished. And then he looked at me and he goes, now that was a stupid question. Well, and I'm saying to myself, it really wasn't a stupid question. It could have been a very informative question. And, he looked at me and he said, I do not compare players. And I started answering him back. I said, well, Coach, what I was saying, I didn't ask if this guy was good. And then I just stopped. And I realized, prolonging this conversation was fruitless.
It was not a conversation.
No,
it was a monologue.
It was a monologue. And I said, yes, sir, Coach, duly noted. Thank you very much. Interestingly, we fast forward, a number of years later, and Alabama had trouble handling very talented tight ends for the other team. Bama played Ole Miss, and Evan Ingram, I think he still just caught another pass. I mean, the guy was just spectacular, and Bama couldn't handle him. Then the Tide goes to Arkansas, and they had a kid named Gerald Sprinkle, who was a big tight end, very, very, very good. And I had to ask about these tight ends.
Did you compare them?
I had to compare them.
Compared them.
I had to compare them without using the C word. So he answers my previous question. And I said, Coach, let's talk about tight ends. I forget who the coaches were, but I said, I think Hugh Freeze had, he had Evan Ingram, and he was doing this and this and this. And, Brett Bielema has this guy here, Gerald Sprinkle. And I said, how do the coaches use their tight ends differently? Which I thought was pretty good.
It's a contrast.
Yeah, it's a contrasting. And he actually answered the question very well. And in the course of the answer, compared the two tight ends. But it was just that stuff you learn. You asked about how adjustments you have to make. That's the stuff you learn, because you have to, it is their show. It's the Nick Saban show. It's not the Eli Gold show. And we had to make those adjustments over the course of years as things changed.
You crack the code, so to speak.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Saban's obviously a very serious guy.
Mm-hmm.
He's very efficient, runs a tight ship, very regimented. Did you see much of Nick Saban's rumored sense of humor firsthand?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, he had a great sense of humor. We're doing the show one Thursday night, the Hey Coach, Nick Saban show. And a guy calls in, and he and the coach get into a really humorous dissertation about something. I forget what it was. But it brought, both men were playing off each other, and he didn't know the guy on the phone, but they were playing off each other. It was pretty cool. And the coach says something, and the guy comes back, and then I jumped in. The coach is answering, and I jumped right in, and I said, now, folks, see, this is the Nick Saban that we have gotten to see over the years. It's not just the Nick Saban standing behind the podium, speaking in 40-second sound bites on Monday and Wednesday, and banging his fingers on the podium. And
you're giving me flashbacks.
Yeah, and clearly not necessarily wanting to be there. I said, this is the real Nick Saban. And he then cuts me off, the coach does, and he says, so what you're saying is that during the week I'm a real schmuck. I said, your words, not mine. And he looked at me, and he just broke out in big laughter. And he had a great sense of humor. He really does. You just have to know when and about what subjects and so on. It's about players. You can talk about great players. He respects them so much, but he'll also poke them with a little humor now and then.
Well, that radio show is a place where he obviously loosened up quite a bit. And
yeah.
You hosted that show so often.
I never believed it, but I did believe it. But everybody told me he loved doing that show. And I'm saying to myself, this is a guy who's not that open. I said, why would he love doing that show? I mean, so many other coaches hate their talk shows. So many coaches now do, 4 a year. Some coaches don't do them at all anymore. I said, why does Nick say? And they said it's because he loves getting out of the office. He loves seeing regular people. He loves not having to deal with exclusively the folks in the next office, whatever it might be. He likes getting out. He really does. And he's comfortable because he knows I'm not a mainline media guy, and I don't apologize for that. I'm not going to throw him under the bus. I'm not trying to catch him on anything. It was, just a conversation, couple of guys sitting around Baumhauer's shooting the breeze. I know NFL stuff. He likes talking NFL. I know that, we got along great. So he genuinely I've heard that from his wife, from his secretary. I've heard that from his kids. I've heard it from a lot of people. He really looks forward to that show on Thursday nights.
We're going to take a break, Eli. More with Beat Everyone. This is The Golden Age with Eli Gold, and we're going to talk all things Nick Saban. We'll be right back. Back here on Beat Everyone, this is The Golden Age with the one and only Eli Gold.
Yeah, Eli, so we were talking about Nick Saban and his interactions with the press. I know he got on you with the comparison question.
Yeah.
Clearly, he liked to go after us quite a bit. Everyone in my family knows me as Rat Poison after my famous soundbite moment with him.
I don't know if he liked to get after you. Yeah. He had, I don't know. And
there was some sport to it. There were times.
But he had a message that he wanted to get across. And he was not going to allow Ben or Michael or whomever interfere with getting that message across.
Exactly.
So I don't know if, I don't know if he was after you or that you were just kind of in the way at times.
Yeah, there were you can kind of put him into two different categories.
Yeah.
There were the times where the Rat Poison was clearly, he had just said that in the locker room. That was like a pre-scripted thing in his sense that someone was going to get that. And there were times where he doesn't like a question. And sometimes you can break that into different categories, into a truly bad question and a question he just doesn't like.
Yeah.
The comparison, over the years, I've figured out how to craft a question to stay away from the landmine words that would draw those moments. But did you ever find him intimidating?
That's a good question. I don't know if I found him intimidating, but I wanted to make sure I didn't screw up.
But
I wanted to make sure I didn't screw up with any of those coaches, But I will tell you this, there were times in the Nick Saban era where I would go in to do our pregame show and I would have one or two questions written down on an index card, exactly the way I wanted to spew it out, whatever it might have been, because it was, it might have been a little, a question that he maybe didn't want to address or had addressed earlier in the week, and it needed to be talked about, but obviously he went off on somebody earlier in the week. So I was concerned enough to write the questions down that way. But I don't know if I was intimidated per se, but I was overly careful.
Yeah, that's fair. I would write them down in moments like that as well. Just to write it in the way that it should be spoken, because it was, with him, it was not always what you asked, it was how you would ask it.
Yeah.
And he would try to pick you apart if the wording was a little bit off. So sometimes you don't like to script things, but sometimes you had to script the way you wanted to ask it.
I never script anything. That's that was the exception, the pregame questions. But a lot of play-by-play guys would get on the air and just read the first 3.5, 4 minutes of the game. They would have a script written out. And I can't do that. I'm better just, I know the subject matter. I know what needs to be covered. And I just sit and do it and bring everybody in, and there's nothing that's scripted. There were a few things that I thought about, like how I would wrap up a national championship win if Alabama won a ball game for the national title. I'd have some ideas in my head about what I might say, but beyond that, nothing was ever scripted.
When did you learn that he would or might retire? When did you first catch wind of that? When everybody else did?
Yes. I was in the bedroom doing something, and my wife yelled from the living room, "Hey, Nick's retiring." Around the house, he would call him Nick, but never to his face.
That was one of my questions.
Yeah. No, he was always Coach Saban.
That one off.
I would never, ever call him Nick. Privately, my wife and I, sometimes we would say Nick, but never in public and never in dealing with him in a one-on-one. It was always Coach or Coach Saban. But I learned that day. She said, "Hey, they say Nick is retiring." And I ran into the living room where the TV was on and watched all the stuff unfold.
And so you called his entire tenure at Alabama.
Yeah.
And obviously, when you learned he was retiring timeline-wise, did you already know that your time at Alabama had also ended, or were you still?
No.
Okay.
No, as a matter of fact, I thought that they would like to keep me at least for another year as a transition, have Eli talk about Coach DeBoer just like he did about Coach Saban. But, of course, the other line of thinking is, hey, Coach DeBoer is in, let's start anew and start fresh. But no, I didn't think of that at all.
So does that hit you immediately? Wow, I called his entire Alabama career. Like, how do you reflect on your role in documenting that piece of sports history, not just Alabama?
I don't know. It didn't dawn on me at that point. He is the guy. I was merely the conduit of information. He would have been magnificently successful if somebody else was behind the microphone.
Oh, no, don't sell yourself short.
No.
I think it was all you.
No,
Eli.
it wasn't. I did nothing to contribute to his success. So I never even thought about it like that. I mean, I was honored to be there and honored to be able to participate the way I did. And it was a great shot in the arm for my career, because every time you turn the TV on, ESPN or Fox or whomever was playing Alabama radio highlights. And, I got a lot of exposure from CBS and so on. But no, I never thought about that. But I knew how special it was. I mean, I knew how special that era was. But I never really thought about my contributions because there really were none.
Yeah, and it's interesting to think about it now that the book is closed on that era, just how impactful it was just on the state. I mean, I wouldn't be here probably if it wasn't for Nick Saban.
Yeah.
The job that I took in 2009 to cover Alabama probably wouldn't have been as attractive if they weren't doing what they were doing on their way up. I wouldn't have this family that I have here living in Birmingham.
Mm-hmm.
So I even wrote about that in the days after the retirement, that I the more I think about it, the more I kind of owe to Nick Saban indirectly. On taking a few lashings on TV. He's yelled at me a few times, but I probably owe more to him than I even realized.
Yeah, no question about it. So no, I didn't think about it like that. I felt bad. I felt bad and good. I was happy for him. I genuinely was. When you're a head football coach at that level, you don't have a life. You don't have a life. Well, all of a sudden, Miss Terry gets her husband back. The kids get their daddy back. The grandchildren get grandpa back. He gets to fish and to play golf and to do whatever else he wants to do and hang out on the beach down in Florida, whatever is of, his mind. He has earned that. And I was thrilled for him that while they are still healthy, they could get that part of their life in check. I was disappointed for me because I loved working with the guy. It had nothing to do with, who the next coach was, nothing. and Coach DeBoer and I have met, and we get along wonderfully. But he, at this point, I was happy for the coach. I really was, but I was not necessarily happy for me because I enjoyed working with him.
Did you have a favorite memory, a favorite moment you had? Interaction, question?
When I was sick, he would always call. Miss Terry would text and call to see how I was doing and so on. Years and years ago, when I fell on a broken piece of concrete outside the locker room, the visiting team locker room at Neyland Stadium, I went down like a sack of potatoes, and a heavy sack of potatoes in those days, heavier than they are now. And the next thing they had to carry me upstairs, get me into the booth, help me down the stairs to do the broadcast. I did the broadcast with my leg extended up in the air, went home and had surgery on my knee on Tuesday. This goes back, 15 years ago, something like that. And, but I got a call, and then I got a package in the mail, and it was his handwriting. So I knew at least, he had signed the card. They had sent me some shirts and a warm-up outfit, warm-up suit that the team got for their last bowl game that I didn't get. He said, here, use this to do your rehab and get better and, stuff like that. So I don't know. Now, there are so many that I really couldn't pick out just one. He talked with me in a heartfelt conversation the day I was let go. I called him and we talked, and that was, very, very special to me. I won't share what he said. Good question, though, but I won't share. But it was just, he was a nice man. We got along. We had a wonderful working relationship.
How do you think he's going to do as a broadcaster? Because
he's spectacular.
He's obviously, you've been side by side with him in terms of broadcasting, doing the radio show, the pregame interviews. So he's done it here and there for much of his career, but now he's going to be in more of a full-time role. What do you think is going to happen there?
I think he will embarrass everybody else on that set by his degree of preparation. He is going to be the most informed, with no disrespect to anybody on that set, and clearly, everybody on that set is deserving of being there. But he is going to be so prepared that it's going to blow everybody away. His work on the draft, the pre-draft shows and so on, was spectacular. He is going to be outstanding. He is going to be outstanding. How is he going to be comfort-wise if he has to second-guess somebody? I don't know. That's not easy to do, and it's not easy to know how he'll handle that. But as far as analysis and talking about, this player and that player, and without comparing them, I think he's going to be absolutely spectacular.
This has been fascinating, Eli. We could obviously ask you a million questions.
We'll come back next week and we'll do it. We'll do it again.
I was going to say we'll stop there today. So thank you so much for that and for your time. If you've got a question for Eli, please leave a voicemail at 205-523-4809. Subscribe to Beat Everyone on Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. You can find us on YouTube, obviously. And next time, we're going to go a little bit deeper into Eli's process, how he does his job, how he did his job as the voice of the University of Alabama Crimson Tide. So for Michael Casagrande and Ben Flanagan, thank you. Thanks for joining us for another episode of Beat Everyone, brought to you by Broadway Joe's, the newest sports betting app launching later this fall.